Hey everyone, in this video we are going to have an introduction to life science. And the learning competencies for this is to explain the evolving concept of life based on emerging pieces of evidence, describe classic experiments that model conditions which may have enabled the first life forms to evolve, and to describe how unifying themes in the study of life show connections among living things and how they interact. And these are your specific learning outcomes.
Oh, wow.
Now, let's start with biology. Biology is the scientific study of life, and the person who conducts research in biology is called a biologist. Now, when you are already thinking like a biologist, many interesting questions probably occur to you when you are outdoors surrounded by the natural world. It is undeniable that more than anything else, biology is a quest of ongoing inquiry about the nature of life and even the origin of life. So, a small child realizes that a cat or a plant is alive, while rocks and cars are not. However, a phenomena called life go beyond a one sentence or phrase definition. It is because we recognize life by what living things do, apparently by the characteristics, properties associated with life. For example, we have the pygmy seahorse. So this is a pygmy seahorse camouflaging itself with its environment. It shows evolution and adaptation to survive, which is a characteristic of life. Another one is the monarch butterfly. Okay, it is obtaining fuel in the form of nectar from flowers, which shows acquisition and use of energy. This one shows a sprouting seed, which shows the characteristics of life, growth, and development. Lastly, this image shows a fly trap closing its trap, which shows an organism's response to the environment. Now that we know what life is based on, it is time to address some questions, such as how did life begin? What are some theories and evidence pertaining to life? We actually have a lot of evidence, theories, and hypotheses about the historical development of the concept of life, which we will talk about one by one. The first four, the blue ones, are the early theories, and the others are some of the modern theories, the green ones. First is the theory of special creation. It proposed that life on Earth is created by a supernatural power, so meaning the God. So, according to the Christian belief, God has created the universe, planet, animal, plant, and human in 6 natural days. Now, similar beliefs are also being proposed by other religions. So, number one is that all living organisms were created in the same day. This means that there is no difference in their appearance. Number two, they were created in the present form. It means that there is no evolution. And number three is that their bodies and organs are fully developed to meet the requirement to run the life. So it says that there is no adaptation. So here are now the objections to the theory of special creation. Okay, number one, they said that it is purely based on religious belief. Number two, there was no experimental evidences to support the assumption. And number three, the age of different fossils proves that living organisms appear on Earth in different time frame. Okay, so the next theory is the theory of Cosmozoic. This theory was put forward by Hermann Richter and strongly supported by Arrhenius. This theory assumes that life was present in the form of resistant spores and appeared on Earth from other planet. Since the condition of Earth was supporting the life, these spores grew and evolved into different organisms. So this theory was also known as the theory of panspermia or the spore theory. Now, the theory initially got support from the fact that the fossils of microorganisms were found in meteorites in 1961. However, of course, there are objections to this theory. First, there's no mechanism known about the transfer of spores from other planets or whether these spores could survive the journey in space. Okay, next, the absence of life forms on any planet except Earth is questionable. Number three, there is a lack of details about the spores, such as where do they came from and the mechanism of crossing interplanetary space and reaching the Earth. In addition, this theory doesn't add much into the fundamental details about the origin of life. Okay, so basically, there's no scientific experiment given to support the theory. Okay, so as a result, this hypothesis didn't receive much attention. The next theory is the theory of spontaneous generations. This is also called as the abiogenesis. The theory of spontaneous generation assumes that non-living material in a spontaneous manner give rise to life. Okay. Now there are several observations supporting this theory. First is the hair of horsetail dipped in water gives rise to horsehair worm. And number two, the fly larvae develops on rotten meat. Number three, in ancient Egypt, it was believed that frog, snake, crocodiles in the mud of Nile River warmed the sun. Okay. So ancient Greek philosophers, namely Thales, Anaximander, and scientists of the medieval period like Harvey, Newton, and Needham, are some of the first believers of this theory. Now, there is another person in the name of Van Helmont who claimed that he can produce mice from the dirty sheet and handful of wheat grains kept in dark cupboard in 3 weeks. Now, of course, this sounds ridiculous, so there are some evidences against this theory of spontaneous generations. So this was heavily criticized by three great scientists who performed well-designed experiments to disprove the theory of spontaneous generations. The first one is by Francesco Redi. So Francesco Redi placed meat and fishes in three separate jars. The first jar was left open. The second jar was covered with gauze, and the third one was covered with paper. Now the meat decayed in all three jars and attracted flies. In jar number one, the flies entered and laid eggs, which eventually gave birth to new larvae. Whereas in jar number two, flies couldn't enter, so therefore no larvae was found inside the jar. But the flies laid eggs on the gauze that produced the larvae. In jar number three, it didn't attract flies, no eggs, therefore there's no maggots. This has conclusively proves that organisms arise from the pre-existing organisms rather than the non-living matter. The second experiment is by Lazaro. So this experimental setup is given in this figure. In this experiment, Lazaro has prepared animal or vegetable broth and boiled them for several hours, and then either remained open or sealed immediately. So these broth remained free from microorganism growth. He concluded that high temperature boiling had killed all microorganisms, and in the absence of microorganisms, life could not appear. The broth left open or exposing of sealed broth shows growth of microorganisms. The third one is by Louis Pasteur. Pasteur had designed experiment in a flask with S-shaped curved tube, just like this. He took hay infusion in the flask and boiled for several minutes. After cooling, the steam condensed into the lower part of the tube and act as a barrier to stop the entry of microorganisms. So no life appeared in the flask for several months. Analysis of condensed water indicates appearance of microorganisms in the neck of the tube. So the breaking of S here in the lower part allowed the growth of microorganisms in the flask. Now these three experiments gave birth to the next theory called the theory of biogenesis. Okay, the first one is the theory of abiogenesis. This one is biogenesis. This is proposed by Francesco Redi, Richter, and Louis Pasteur. Okay, according to this theory, life arose from pre-existing life. So Redi practically proved that life never arose from non-living matter, right? Maggots will arise from decaying organic meat if it contains eggs only. If eggs are absent on such meat, maggots will never arise. Okay? Now, biogenesis came from two words. Bio means life, and genesis, which means beginning. Now, even though biogenesis explains the formation of living organisms from pre existing life, it really never explains the origin of first living organisms. But it laid the foundation for proposing the theories of organic evolution. Now, the next theories that we are going to discuss will be the modern theories. Okay? So, the modern theory is actually composed of three theories. We have Alexander Oparin's theory, we have the co-asservation theory, and we have the JBS Haldane's hypothesis. Alexander Oparin claimed that life on Earth developed through gradual chemical changes of organic molecules in the primordial soup, which likely existed on Earth 4 billion years ago. Now, the co-asservation theory is also a theory by Oparin in 1936, which suggests that the origin of life was preceded by the formation of mixed colloidal units called coacervates. Coacervates are particles composed of two or more colloid, which might be protein, lipid, or nucleic acid. Now, in 1929, the British biologist John Burdon Sanderson Haldane published a hypothesis on the origin of life on Earth, which was one of the most emblematic of the interwar period. Haldane hypothesized that the oceans powered by the sun or lightning served as a huge cooking pot where chemical reactions could occur in an aqueous environment to form a huge diversity of organic compounds. So this modern theory was simultaneously proposed by Russian biochemist Oparin and the British biologist Haldane. Later on, Oparin published the book The Origin of Life in 1936. So Oparin explained the origin of life from non-living materials through the chemical evolution of life. You have to remember that Oparin's theory is called naturalistic theory or the theory of coacervates. Okay, so now let's talk about the chemical theory. So modern theory is also known as the chemical theory or the theory of primary abiogenesis. In the modern theory, the hypothesis of abiogenesis was proposed with the condition that the non-living materials can give rise in the condition of primitive Earth. So the condition of the primitive Earth is different from the present condition here in 2022, which do not permit abiogenesis. Now, Oparin and JBS Haldane have made the following assumptions. First, they said that spontaneous generation of life under the present environment is not possible. Okay. Second, Earth's atmosphere around 1 billion years ago is very different from the current conditions. Number three, primitive Earth's atmosphere was reducing in nature. Number four, under these conditions, the chemical molecules, in this case inorganic molecules, react with each other through a series of reactions to form organic substances and complex biomolecules. And number five, the solar energy and UV radiation provided the energy for the chemical reactions. Okay, so the modern theory, specifically Haldane's theory, didn't find much support without scientific experimentation. To conclusively support the chemical theory, Miller and Ulrey conducted experiment in mimicking primitive Earth environment. So this is called the Ulrey-Miller experiment. They performed this in 1952. The experimental setup consists of a glass flask, a condenser, a liquid flask interconnected with tubes, and of course a source of electric spark to provide energy. He introduced a mixture of methane, ammonia, and hydrogen in the ratio of 2:2:1 and water vapor. After that, he allowed to circulate the mixture into the closed glass apparatus for 18 days continuously. So he provided energy in the form of spark by supplying electricity around 75,000 volts through two electrodes. So the electric spark mimics lightning in the primitive Earth atmosphere. While passing the mixture, the gases were passes through a liquid flask to stimulate the volcano. The mixture was collected from the stopcock and analyzed. Now, the analysis of mixture indicates the presence of amino acids such as glycine, alanine, aspartic acid, and nitrogen-based adenine and simple sugar ribose. In addition, he found hydrogen cyanide, formaldehyde, and other active intermediate compounds such as acetylene and cyanoacetylene. This slide shows the chemical reactions which might explain the formation of the said compounds. Okay, so this is not really that important. So according to the chemical theory of origin of life, a series of chemical synthesis give rise to life. As per the hypothesis, origin of life have four major steps. First is the formation of inorganic molecules, followed by the spontaneous formation of monomeric organic compounds, followed by the spontaneous formation of complex organic compounds, and lastly, the spontaneous formation of molecular aggregates. Okay, so let's talk about these steps one by one. So, in the formation of inorganic compounds, remember that the high temperature of primitive Earth didn't allow the condensation of atoms to form inorganic molecules. So, as the temperature of Earth goes down, condensation of different atoms give rise to simpler molecules. So the elements most abundant on the primitive Earth are hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon. So the reaction of these molecules give rise to the gases such as hydrogen, nitrogen, ammonia, methane, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. Now, the energy for these reactions was provided by sunlight, lightning, or volcanic eruptions. Okay, remember this. The second step is the formation of monomeric organic compounds. So here, just remember that the simple molecules interact with each other to form simple monomeric organic compounds. So these molecules were sugar, this one is called glucose, glycerol, amino acids, and organic bases. So this one is called the pyrimidine. So the reactions between the inorganic to give simple organic molecules occurs in reducing environment inside the ocean. Okay, so the inorganic molecules were condensed in the form of rain, hence both inorganic compounds and simple organic compounds were present in the primordial ocean. Next is the formation of complex organic compounds. So just remember that here, the small, simpler organic compounds react to form complex organic compounds. Okay, so the simple amino acids reacts to form polypeptides. Sugar reacts to form large sugar molecules. Fatty acids and glycerol combine together to give fat. Again, heat of the sun is utilized for providing energy for this reaction to occur. The last step is the formation of molecular aggregates. So here, large organic molecules came together to form colloidal aggregates called as coacervates. So a layer of water molecules form around the protein molecules present in coacervates. So the membrane present around these molecules protect them and bring high local concentration to enhance chemical reactions. So the colloidal aggregates absorb protein and other molecules from the ocean. This results in growth in coacervate as well as internal complexity as coacervate divides into multiple small ones. Remember that these coacervates are the initial species present in the ocean to start the formation of primary cells. Okay, so this process is accomplished in two steps. The first step is the formation of eobionts or protocells. Take note that coacervates has the ability to take up new molecules to replace the degraded molecules and maintain the size. Thus, coacervates has the basic property of a living system, but it doesn't have complex molecules such as enzymes, right? Therefore, the process of acquiring new molecules was not regulated. Later, nucleic acid is entrapped within the coacervates and process of division became precise and controlled. This form of coacervates with nucleic acid is known as eubionts or protocells. Now, the second step is the formation of the first cells. Protein molecules and appearance of enzymes have enhanced the synthesis of several biomolecules and eubionts. RNA and DNA developed, and these molecules have taken over the protein synthesis. So the interaction of lipid and protein allowed the formation of biomembrane, which has provided selectivity in the primitive cell for intake or exclusion of material. It also allowed the appearance of membrane-bound protocell, and that has eventually given first cell on Earth. Okay, so the mutation in DNA and selection of fast-growing cell give rise to the appearance of the first primordial cell. Okay, remember class that the first cellular form on Earth appeared around 2,000 million years ago. Let's now talk about the fossils. Fossils are the preserved remains or traces of remains of ancient animals and plants. The origin of life consisted of events on a molecular scale and cannot be studied in the fossil record. But the record is valuably informative about timing. Remember that the Earth itself is about 4.5 billion years old, and for the first few hundred million, it was far too hot to support life. And the earliest fossil evidence for life is about 3.5 billion years old and comes from some of the oldest rocks on the planet. Okay? They are already cellular and presumably descended from a long period of prior evolution. The striking fact about the evidence is that it suggests a very early time of origin for life. We can infer that life originated almost as soon as the physical conditions of Earth permitted it. Now, if you want to learn more about fossils, I have a video for that. The last one is using the geologic timescale. The geologic timescale is the calendar for events in Earth's history. It subdivides all time into named units of abstract time called eons, era, period, epochs, ages, as seen in this chart. The geologic timescale was developed after scientists observed changes in the fossils going from oldest to youngest sedimentary rocks. Okay? So they used relative dating to divide Earth's past in several chunks of time when similar organisms were on Earth. Later, scientists used the absolute dating to determine the actual number of years ago that events happened. Now, I have a very detailed discussions about this, so if you want, you may just go to the playlist.
제 영상 많이 찾아와 주세요. 좋아요랑 좋아요. 이거 NG인데?